Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our fourth Healing Communities to Heal the World event. I'm Kihara Morvising, the director of the Restorative Justice Program at Vermont Law and Graduate School. Today, we are focusing on learning how communities that have been hard hit economically can recover from economic downturns by looking towards their local resources, including the wisdom of local people and the specialness of the place where they're located. Today, we will hear two different perspectives, a big picture perspective from the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, who works with communities across the nation to find their way through economic downturns by empowering local people to make change, and a case study of Millinocket, Maine, a rural community that was a mill town that has done remarkable work to find its identity after the mill closed. We hope that by hearing these stories, it gives you insight into what could work elsewhere. To share a bit of background, I first encountered Millinocket, Maine in 2019, when I was invited to learn about the community engagement taking place in a project called our Katahdin. Katahdin is the tallest mountain in Maine and the end of the Appalachian Trail, and is located in a state park close to the rural community of Millinocket. The Great Northern Paper Company was a huge employer in Millinocket for generations, employing massive amounts of local people in the mill, and at one time the region had some of the highest per capita income in Maine. Then things changed. Over time, the mills closed, and the businesses that supported the town disappeared. The effects were serious. The population dropped by more than a third, unemployment rose far above the state average, and household incomes fell below it. Economic prospects waned with job losses, social connections weakened as families moved away, and cultural vibrancy dimmed with the closure of community centers and the end of local events. So the region really had a tough choice: follow the usual pattern of rural decline and kind of grapple with that, and try to do their best, or try something new. The people of Millinocket and the Katahdin region decided to try something new. Around 2018, Millinocket embarked on a range of community engagement strategies to help the community figure out its identity, given the mill's closure, and this project was called our Katahdin after the local mountain. Community engagement focused on this question, and I'll read it straight from their report, which my colleagues can place in the chat for your reference. It's a great report to check out. The question we are all faced with is this: do we want a future that plays out our current trajectory with few economic opportunities, a depressed economy, tattered social network, and a diminishing population, or a future with vibrant communities, new economic growth, varied businesses and industries to support the towns, and first-rate tourist opportunities? The national trend is for urban growth while rural areas slowly diminish. We want to buck that trend. We want to build an economy that retains existing talent, brings in new neighbors, sustains growth, and gives our children the chance to build a life in their hometown. Healing was also a part of these community engagement efforts, including honoring the grief and loss of the mill, but also things like grieving the history of the land and the experiences of the Wabanaki people and losses from the opioid epidemic. Healing also focused on moving past historic rivalries between towns to reinforce more regional collaboration and build trust and hope. So how did Millinocket do this? Through a range of community engagement strategies, from more traditional methods like surveys, interviews, and public workshops, to more community-focused events like festivals, community dinners, and multiple events, one of which, I really like this name, was called S'mores and Stargazing. Through this open effort, the region created a bold vision to become a unique, welcoming destination known for top-notch outdoor recreation in every season, while building a modern forest economy focused on innovation and sustainability. The vision also valued making the region a place that supports and attracts people of all ages, and one that is, quote, future-proofed, which means prepared and resilient for the changes to come. So as you hear from our speakers today, both Steve Sanders and Mike Smith's work builds off of those strategic goals, and they will share more about how that work has played out over the years. Steve has worked with the project our Katahdin and works as the director of the mill site redevelopment at One North, an organization focused on expanding Maine's bioeconomy through forestry and renewable energy. Mike is the executive director of the Outdoor Sports Institute, where he works to create active, resilient outdoor communities through efforts such as trail access and community programming. But these issues are not limited to Millinocket. So many communities around across the US and world encounter the challenge where something happens to the community that affects its economy, and then the community struggles to pull itself out of the downturn and heal from the past. We will also hear today from someone who has a bird's eye view on these issues, Kennedy Smith, who works at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, which helps communities to focus on the power present in their local communities through building local businesses, community banks, and local infrastructure like energy sufficiently and broadband internet. So I think the combination of these three speakers is going to be really powerful. So now I will turn to questions for the speakers. So speakers, I'd love to start with some introductions. Kennedy, please introduce yourself, sharing a little bit about what your organization does. In particular, it'd be great to hear information about how you work with communities to address local economic challenges.
Sure. Thanks, Kihad. I'm really happy to be here today. The Institute for Local Self-Reliance is a national nonprofit research and advocacy organization that advocates for economies that are driven by local priorities, not by corporate interests. As Kihada said, we have a division that focuses on independent business, where I'm a senior researcher. We also look at community-based broadband, renewable energy, all areas in which communities can have a real impact by building a, a, a a strong local economy. We do work at both the federal policy level and also, it is sort of boots on the ground advising communities in best practices and things that we've seen. I've been involved in community economic development for 30 years. I was at the National Main Street Center for 19 years, and I brought a lot of those on the ground experiences with me to my work at ILSR.
Thank you very much, Kennedy. We're glad you're with us today. Now let's move on to Steve. Steve, could you tell us about the hats you wear in Millinocket, and in particular, how you've worked there to address local economic challenges?
Sure. Yeah, I've been director of mill site redevelopment for Our Katahdin since about 2018, just about a year after Our Katahdin purchased the 1,400-acre mill site. And by backing up, I'm a Millinocket native. I grew up here. I graduated high school from here, and moved away for a bit, but have really been back in the community since 2010. And give you a little perspective, the mill ceased operations in Millinocket in 2008. Arcatiden was formed in 2014 and purchased the mill site in 17. So that's kind of the timeline. And so when I graduated high school, the mills employed over 4,000 people in the two neighboring communities. Um, and to go from that to zero, as you can imagine, has been quite a transformation, especially in such an isolated region as Milwaukee. We don't draw on other population bases. We're at the end of the road. We're on the edge of the forest. And so our work has been focused on diversifying our local economy to not be a one-horse town, but to still draw on the assets and the reason why paper was here. We have clean water, we have renewable power, and we have forest resource. So we're using those natural advantages and some of the leftover assets, reinvesting in those, and trying to restart our industrial base here.
Thanks, Steve. Really glad to have you with us today. And now I'd love to hear from Mike. Mike, could you tell us about the hats that you wear in Millinocket, and in particular, how you've worked there to address local economic challenges and also build community?
Sure, thanks. Really happy to be here. So as was said, I'm the executive director of the Outdoor Sport Institute, which is a nonprofit based here in the Katahdin region. I live here in Millinocket. Our work at OSI really started around, the value of human-powered activities that engage us with the outdoors. And over the years, that work really shifted to focus on, what are the conditions that we create in a community that allow um, engaging with the outdoors to be part of the community, part of the culture. And so our work really focuses on three areas. One is infrastructure development, recreational infrastructure development, which primarily for us means community trail development. And then our second focus area is workforce and leadership development, working with the folks in a community that can sustain outdoor recreation as part of the fabric of that place. And then community activation, working with partners and collaborators to make sure that there are opportunities available for all ages and all abilities that get folks outdoors. So I've been working here in Millinocket, well, as long as OSI has been around, which is about 10 years. I started doing work here in the region through a previous nonprofit that I worked for back in 2011, 2012. And then as we were forming OSI, really the influence of what we were seeing happening in this region formed a lot of what got built into the nonprofit that was started in 2016. And I moved here full time in 2017, 2018 after spending some seasons doing work here in the community. So it's been quite a journey, which I'm sure we'll get more into.
Thanks so much, Mike. It's an honor to have you with us. So, Kennedy, I'm going to start with a question for you. You work nationally with communities that have struggles with their local economies, and the downturn of local economies can cause communities to face deep emotional and cultural upheaval. From your national perspective, what patterns do you see in how places navigate that loss and re-examine identity? And where do you see some silver linings that can emerge in these moments? We'd love to hear you share some examples from different places you've worked that illustrate how communities have found success in rebuilding local economies.
That's a great question. One of the things is that, as anyone who's experienced any kind of upheaval in a community has seen, it can be terrifying, and that can sometimes cause people to simply freeze and not know what to do. But as you mentioned with silver linings, it also creates opportunities to re-envision the community and its future. And that's a really exciting process, and some very creative ideas come out of it. It isn't just about creating new opportunities, it's about having the opportunity to prevent bad things from happening in the future, from learning from mistakes, and putting preventive tools in place basically to make sure that things don't happen again. Some examples I could give you of different kinds of crises and upheavals at the beginning of the pandemic. Fresno County California, was struggling to get money to local banks to make loans to small businesses who were struggling to stay afloat and stay open during the pandemic. And the county pension fund realized that they were investing their pension fund monies in these sort of national tranches of money that were recommended by national advisors, and that they should instead be investing that money in their local financial institutions. So they took a tranche of that money and instead invested it in local banks, who were then able to basically almost double the amount of money they had available for small business loans. Really made a huge difference in keeping those businesses afloat. So a very creative solution to a small business lending problem. There are a number of communities that have dealt with depopulation and vacancy in creative ways. Kansas has a grant program called Home in the Heartlands, where basically they will give grants to people to move to Kansas. And they have some criteria that you have to meet, but it's been very popular and successful in attracting new residents. Communities like Baltimore have dealt with high vacancy by doing things like residential and storefront homesteading programs. In Baltimore, they started out 20 years ago with a program where you could buy a house, an abandoned house in Baltimore, for $1 if you simply agreed to invest a certain amount of money in rehabbing it and agreed to live there for 3 to 5 years. They're doing the same thing now with commercial storefront buildings, where people can start a business pretty affordably by buying a storefront for $1, investing the sweat equity that it takes to rehab the building and get going. Paducah, Kentucky did something similar. They had what they call their artist relocation program, to attract artists to their Lower Town neighborhood, which had a very high vacancy rate. And they had a whole flexible package of incentives that they used to attract artists. They sometimes could give them buildings for free. They did lots of marketing things. And I think that in their story, there's an interesting lesson, which is that there was no one entity that sort of coordinated the whole thing. Instead, they kind of pulled together the resources of the entire community, of financial institutions, philanthropic institutions, independent businesses, realtors, recognizing that they each had a particular skill and resource and vantage point to bring to this. And so they kind of coordinated those efforts to make the project work. One more example I wanted to mention is from North Tulsa, Oklahoma, which was the historic Black Wall Street. And they had a sort of health crisis there beginning about 20 years ago when they lost their last grocery store. And a woman ran for city council, a woman named Vanessa Hall Harper, because she was, uh, she'd seen all these chain dollar stores move into the neighborhood, but no grocery stores. And they offered, prepackaged, shelf-stable, highly processed food. And her background was in public health, and she did some analyses and realized that people who live in North Tulsa had a 9-year shorter life expectancy than people who lived in the rest of the city. So she launched a whole healthy food initiative that included an ordinance that limits the number of dollar stores that can locate there and the distance apart they can be so that they're not flooded with dollar stores. And then after she tried to recruit a national grocer, she called every national grocery store chain. They all said, you have too many dollar stores. We couldn't survive there. So she raised the money with a bunch of partners, including the Tulsa Economic Development Authority and some private foundations in the city, and raised the money basically to buy the land and build a grocery store building that they then lease for almost nothing to a grocer to operate there. It's a fabulous grocery store called Oasis Fresh Market, which is now looking to expand into other parts of the city and other cities around the country. With a great model of reducing the cost for its operation by simply owning the building. And I'll probably come back and talk about community ownership of property a little bit later too. But those are some examples. I could go on forever, so I'll stop for now.
I mean, I feel really inspired hearing those examples, and it's just amazing to hear the range of activity in these different locations around the country. So thanks for warming us up. I feel like that's got everyone's wheels turning now. Um, I wanted to say something I forgot to say at the beginning to the audience, which is we will have some time for Q&A in the last 20 to 30 minutes of this conversation. So please feel free to put questions in the chat as you have them. We won't get to them until the end, but sometimes if you don't share a question, you'll forget it. And we also will offer an opportunity if you'd like at the end to ask your question for you to unmute and come on camera as well. But for now, I have some more questions for the speakers that I will ask. And next, I'm going to turn to Steve. So, Steve, could you tell us what Millinocket was like when you were growing up there, and how you saw the community change after the mill closed? Sorry, after the mill closed.
Yes. So I graduated in 1989, and I like to describe it as the last of the good times. We still played Class A basketball, and all of our varsity sports teams traveled on private coach buses. And it was a really unique time and community to live in, and we didn't even really realize it. I think one of the stats I give people to tell you the transformation we've seen is I graduated with a class size of 136, and each of my children have graduated in the last 2 years with classes less than 30 people. So that's where we are. So I mean, and we've retained the elderly and the retired people, right? They haven't moved on, but we've lost the working families. Um, Certainly, and the young people. So, and does not make a sustainable community. So, yeah, I mean, we didn't have a hot lunch program when I went to school because everyone lived close to school. It was cheaper to bus them home than it was to feed them, and hardly anyone qualified for subsidized lunches. And I think today you would find that nearly none of them qualify for or all of them would qualify for subsidized lunches. So complete reversal. I could go on and on as the spirit is, but yeah, I mean, I think one other thing is, and we'll get into it a little bit later, I think, is that when we were an industrial town, when we did not talk about tourism or any desire to attract tourism, or it was just, and the local people love love the outdoors, more traditional sports and hunting and fishing and vehicular use, but um, didn't really want to promote it as as a tourism outdoor place, and that's some of our biggest assets, really, is where we're located and what we have around us. And I would say now, after what, 18 years of no industrial activity, and the only growth there has been is in tourism, is that's completely gone away now. There's no talk about even yeah, it's 100% reversal on they realize that, tourism is a part of the economy, and it needs to be, and doesn't reason no reason why industry and tourism can't coexist.
Steve, I'm curious, with that resistance to tourism initially, do you think it was why did people get stuck in a mindset of like we're not a tourist town? What was that about?
Well, I think a lot of it was, because it was Uniontown, it was like, there's no tourist job that's going to support a wage that a union job can. So why do we want lower income jobs? And 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 probably selfishly, like, I've got my favorite fishing spot that I don't see anyone at, and that's where we want to keep it. I mean, that's kind of human nature, I think, as well. Like, you protect what you have.
Yeah, no, I get that for sure. And I could see how, if the identity of Millinocket is this mill town that, maybe people don't want to change into other things. But after, as you said, experiencing a economic downturn, people start to feel differently.
And for whatever
One
reason,
one
they pitted one against the other. Like, the thought of coexistence didn't exist. They thought either we were going to be a complete gateway community to a new national park, which means we weren't going to be in a place that had industrial wood-based jobs. And I don't know where that came from, but that was certainly the mindset. Probably extended back in the 80s, when the Great Northern wanted to build a hydroelectric dam on the west branch of the Penobscot, and there was a lot of controversy over that. And that was probably it. It was either one or the other. You were either going to have it or you weren't.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. One more curiosity that I have on this topic for you, Steve. I read a report called the Gazetteer that describes the Katahdin's experience as one of deep grieving, and I'm curious if that has some resonance for you. Do you feel like Millinocket went through some grief in your experience?
Uh, Definitely. Um, I was around, and I moved back after the mill closed. The other sister mill in East Monaco was still operating. But the whole question was, in my mind, was, well, what does this town look like in 10 years? Like, when you go to zero jobs, what does that mean? There's still going to be a community here, but how low are we going to go? Um, and And I mean, I think there's still grieving going on, but we are definitely on the uprise. There's a much more positive outlook in town. They haven't seen the concrete changes that we need to have yet, but I think we're much, much, much closer. And it's not going to be the community that we did had. I mean, industry does not employ 4,000 people anymore. I mean, that's just not how it works. But a few hundred jobs could make an unbelievable impact and bring us back to the point of sustainability. Um, so yeah, I don't, you know what, living here, you don't, I think people who don't live here, grew up here, have a better sense of the grief. When you're here, you're part of a community. It changes, but it changes so slow, and us as humans, we adapt so quickly to the circumstances that we're in, right? So I don't think of it in terms of like, oh, it used to be. Occasionally, I'll tell my kids like stories about how different my youth was compared to your youth growing up. But that's about the only time. For day to day, you're not dwelling on the fact that, because you're used to as things are now, and you don't think about how far it was. But I think people who have been away and know a town that have an unbelievable sense of change and grief from that.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. As we explore how communities heal, I think, grief is part of that, right? So that's really interesting. Um, Mike, I want to turn to you now. So you came to Millinocket after the community engagement process I described at the beginning of the meeting, and you really entered the region after some hard work had been spent rebuilding trust and reestablishing relationships, setting this new vision. Could you tell us what was the energy like at the time that you entered Millinocket as the community was trying to find a new identity? What were some of the successes and challenges you saw in the community related to that? And how do you see that earlier groundwork shaping today's opportunity for youth, outdoor programs, and community connections?
Yeah. I suppose maybe as a way of answering your question, I might start by sharing a little bit about what my energy was like at that time, because I think what we take in from the world is sort of what we put out there, and where I was at the time of entering this community was one of a lot of uncertainty. I had in younger years had the privilege to travel to some pretty exciting places, teaching and guiding and working in the outdoors. And that had led to this career in outdoor recreation meets rural community development up further north in Maine in Aroostook County, where I grew up, which is, heavily agricultural. Um, I think shares some things in common with the Katahdin region and Millinocket in that, grew up around a healthy skepticism for tourism. I was in a multi-generation family potato farm. I have, countless memories of my father saying, the moment you take away extraction industry, you lose economy. Like there, the tourism's fine, but it's not, don't count on that. And tourism wasn't my interest. My interest was in, sort of what I had found so enriching and exciting about time spent in the outdoors. And I was really curious about Millinocket. My wife and I joke with this term, Millie Curious. I was Millie Curious for a lot of years. I had avid whitewater paddler, hiker, backpacker, skier. So I, like a lot of people, had traveled through this town on my way to the mountains and the rivers that are just on the other side of it. And like a lot of people, you were kind of happy to get through town. It was kind of bleak. But it caught my attention. I had been to enough places where I was like, I don't get it. Like, if you want an amazing outdoor experience, like what better town in the state of Maine than Millinocket? It is surrounded by everything you could want, unless you want the beach. We even got some of that, but it's just this incredible place, and yet evidently it was not a place that sort of felt like welcoming or like a place that people were in a hurry to move to. But that curiosity built in me, and I had opportunities through other work I was doing to start to make connections in the Katahdin region, helping with some trail development ideas and getting to know folks that were already embedded in the community that were starting to think about outdoor recreation. So I would say I was sort of adjacent to this process as it was starting to unfold. Um, and enough of those connections over time sort of built up my courage to say, what if we moved there? What if both personally and professionally we sort of planted a flag there? And it was one of the most terrifying moments of my adult life to be like, yeah, I'm gonna move to Millinocket, because it made sense. All this stuff is around, and like conceptually, the thought that I was gonna have the river in my backyard and Katahdin in my backyard is great, but your experience of being in the town when I got here, those things are still a 40-minute car ride away. Whereas where I was living in Aroostook County, where I grew up, the road biking, the mountain biking, the stuff it wasn't necessarily iconic, but it was there, and it could be part of your daily experience pretty easily, and that was kind of tough here. Um, and I remember the day that I moved into the house that I ended up living in for several years, I woke up that morning. It was just like a day in the spring, and I'm just like, what am I doing here? And then I walked 3 blocks over to the library where I knew they were having a fundraising event, and you turn the corner of the library and there's just all this energy. There are people, there's a picnic, there's, that was the start of the campaign to do a big capital campaign for remodeling the library. And there was so much life contained in this, this one little park. And it was just like this incredible emotional swing from like dread to so much hope and inspiration. So all that is to say, that was my experience here. I think, for several years of it was like one extreme to the next. You would walk around and you would feel the heaviness of a place that I'd never quite experienced before, empty storefronts and just things looking really rough. But then you'd have an interaction with someone and there's so much hope and there's so much willingness to just swing for the fences and try something. Um, and I think it was those moments, that sort of kind of continually gave me the courage to keep going. And I had been previously part of an organization that had a lot of resources and was able to go into communities and sort of make stuff happen. And that was not the case when OSI started, when we showed up here. And I was also sort of terrified of showing up and making promises because I knew how that could play out. So my approach, right or wrong, was pretty quiet. We just sort of got involved where we could. The new library director was really interested in this vision for making gear available through the library system. And we had gear that we could do that with. And so we jumped in on creating this project called the Katahdin Gear Library. And a local resort owner had land that he was willing to make trails happen on that he'd keep open to the community. So we got started there. And someone said to me several years in that OSI was like a shadow government. We were just sort of lurking in the background doing stuff, and it was true. I didn't want to take credit for things. I wanted it to be of and for the community. And we weren't talking about tourism. We weren't talking about economic change. We were sort of just focused on community health and wellness and trying to sort of support people where they were at. Um, and I think that sort of quiet, steady approach um, has 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 worked well for us because as the work has grown, the community has grown, those relationships, it's all been relationships. And now, 10 years in, we have a lot of relationships and we're doing work here and across the region and other Katahdin region communities. Um, and it wouldn't happen without that trust. One of the biggest compliments I think I got in the last 6 months was a retired teacher here in town. He had been at one of our first trail planning meetings in the community. We had done some professional trail planning around the village of Millinocket, and we had a community event, and we, you know, talked about it with the folks there and the landowners, and he was there, and that was back in 2018, 2019. And he just came up to me this fall, and he was like, I just remember sitting there, and you guys were talking about all this and it's happened and you did it. And I just can't like that's so amazing. And to me, that's like, oh, a promise kept. And I think it's been that sort of slow, steady work that's allowed the work to progress. And you know, more often than not, our experience has been people are eager and willing to do things that enrich the community. As long as we stayed focused on that's what we were here to do. And now I feel like we work from within the community. I feel a part of this community and the staff that we brought on, I think very much see themselves as a part of this community as well. And those relationships are making new things possible for sure.
Wow. Thank you. Thanks for sharing all that, Mike. Um, Before I move on, do you want to share an example or two of how your organization has done some community building or relationship building, uh, either with youth or with others? I think that might be interesting for folks to hear about.
Yeah, youth in particular, I think is very interesting. Because youth programming now, one of the initiatives that we've worked on over the last few years is what we call collaborative youth programming, which basically means we've pulled together different organizations from around the region that all have sort of aligned missions, aligned interests in getting youth outdoors, and then sort of work together to create programming. And part of the idea there is, right, we're trying to not just sort of be one organization that's offering an experience, but get support many organizations providing different experiences. Um, and you would think sort of saying like, come do this thing outdoors would be like an automatic yes, but families and parents are our experiences, they were pretty distrustful of sort of a new face. Just because you're offering to do a thing doesn't mean they're going to let their kid enroll in that. And so it was slow going. And our work really was about getting into the schools, getting to know the educators, getting to know the students through that context, having open doors on the main street here where students could walk in and get to know the staff that are there. And then slowly but surely building those relationships to now we're at the point where, at the end of the summer, they wrapped up, I think they had done 8 different outdoor programs, mountain biking, canoeing, hiking, so on and so forth, camping. And one of the families like put on an entire like pulled pork barbecue, for everyone involved, all the organizations, all the kids. Like they're just like, we want to do this, we're so thankful that this thing exists. And that again, that came from like years of working through like, who are you? We don't trust you, to like, oh, okay, this is you, yeah, again, you're part of the community, and we recognize you, and we feel like we can give you a call. So that's an example, I think, of some of that relationship building work. I have countless examples from the trail development side of things. I mean, trail development around here, it's a patchwork of landowners, right? This is not huge swaths of land that are just available. You have to really talk to a lot of folks and work with the motorized partners. And so much of our success in helping to see non-motorized trails get on the ground is being willing to go sit and have a cup of coffee with, the president of the ATV club and just chat things out, or sit in the town garage and chat with the maintenance folks about what's going on. It's work on that level. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but
No, that was
just
great, and I really appreciate the what you've highlighted about uh building slow trust, taking time to really get to know people over a cup of coffee, and that's how you sort of bring people into your organization and build community. It's really inspiring to hear. Steve, I want to turn back to you. Do you want to add any stories of success? I'd love to hear, where did you feel like things started to change in Millinocket? How did Millinocket move from being a place of loss to a place of new beginnings? Tell us some stories.
Well, Architecton started as in 2014 as really just an online platform to raise money for some very small community-led projects. We were looking for people who had ideas, who needed a little help fundraising money. I mean, buying new bats for the Little League charter. I mean, like really small projects, but it was at the low point of the town. The the most signifying event of that was the demolition of the smokestack of the steam plant, right? When that came down, that was an iconic thing. No matter where you were in town, you could locate the smokestack, and it was a landmark, and there was always smoke coming out of it. And when that came down, it really was a visual signal that paper making was over in the Catan region. So that was definitely the very visual low point. And so Arcatana wanted to just have some small wins, and small wins have been an important part. We continue to raise money for small projects, community-led projects. We've done 45 or 50 of them now. And those small wins are important because we're after some very large wins. We're trying to attract multi-hundred-dollar capital investments, which is not easy in Northern Maine. And those take a lot of time. And so the small wins have been important. The other really important, I think, as far as our success has been, or acceptance, is that we're primarily Millinocket based people. We're either grew up here or have been here, and that's been super important because when a community is on hard times like Millinocket, there's a lot of people from the outside who want to try to take advantage, and we have certainly seen our fair share of that. The previous owners of the mill site basically walked out of here with a $16 million tax credit that they didn't have to put any investment in for or create any jobs for. And so the community has been burnt on, hopes of economic development in the past. So being local has really been one of the key importance, just because you don't have community buy-in otherwise, because they've learned some bad hard lessons. I got off track there. Maybe I forgot about what your key point was. We had it, but
Oh, you're doing great.
um, so small wins, continuing wins, and then we've been able to garner a lot of investment. We've raised over $40 million to reinvest back into the site. Th that is going to hopefully end up leveraging hundreds of $1 millions of investment in plants and manufacturing. Um, we on the cusp of having two big operations break ground next year, one in aquaculture and the other in biofuels. Um, and we are about halfway, a little over halfway to deploying that $40 million that we've raised and we continue to raise. Um, but it hasn't brought in yet. It hasn't on a small scale, but not on a large scale. Like as a paper town, you're used to every 10 years the mill putting a couple $100 million into their uh, facility to upgrade, this or that. That brings in hundreds of workers at a time to do that. As Milltown communities are used to that, just constant reinvestment into the facility. And it's been a long time since we've seen that. So now when we bring we had probably 12 guys here all this summer working on a $14 million project to clean up the wastewater treatment lagoons. And that little bit, those 12 guys being in town and staying and spending the money and going out to eat every night makes a big impact on this small town. Um, and we could be in a situation where next year where we're having to support maybe a couple hundred construction workers, and that's going to cause some pains, but good pains to have. So I think, we're getting there. There's no real concrete, and the people I think have resigned themselves to, I'll see it when I believe it. We've heard a lot of false starts, we've heard a lot of things, and we're now very protective on talking about what is going to happen or promises. We try to just talk about what we can deliver, and and people are still a little skeptical, and I'll believe it when I see it, but. Um, it's not going to take a huge change of activity here to make a big impact.
Yeah, that's great, Steve. Thank you for sharing that. Kennedy, I have a feeling that some of what you've just heard Steve say maybe echoes some experiences that you've had in other communities. When you've heard the story of Millinocket today, how does it relate to some of the lessons you've learned about how communities can move out of economic depressions? And I'm curious if there's any differences you see in rural versus urban work. It's because we've really focused on rural work today. And what advice do you want to share with communities looking to undergo work to change their future economy?
Wow. Well, Steve has said a whole bunch of things that really resonated with me, and I've been jotting some notes down. But like the comment about you can be an industrial community or you can be a tourist community, and nobody thought you could be both. One of the things I've universally found is that people, when they're visitors, when they're travelers, when they're on vacation, they want to see something different. If they want to see a town that you pass a million McDonald's and Taco Bells and things to come into town, they can do that anywhere. But if they want to see a town that has a unique industry, that's something special, and people love seeing that kind of stuff. I think about some places I've been that have, you know, quirky sort of one-off businesses. Like Rising Sun, Indiana has a guy downtown that makes uh, by hand makes concert harps. Pretty much everybody in Rising Sun who needs a concert harp has bought one by now. It's all kind of an online business that he does around the world. But you walk down the street and you hear this harp music wafting down the sidewalk, and people are just drawn to it. They just want to go in and see, and he invites them in and he shows them how he makes the harps and gives them a little mini lesson. He sells these t-shirts that say "Love a harpist." There are only 100 some strings attached, and it's a great, interesting kind of thing that the community has by tapping into its own quirks, the interest of its own residents, and making that happen. So I think that industry and tourism actually can be really good partners. Um, there are a couple of things that Steve said that kind of danced around a point that I wanted to make too, which is that upheaval often means that property values drop in a community, and that creates a great opportunity to keep investment local and to rebuild local investment. The story about the previous mill owner who got a $16 million tax credit and left town, I hear that kind of story way too often. Why not have that opportunity accrue to the community itself and keep that wealth local and build generational wealth for years to come. One of the keys to that is not letting big corporations undercut the economy. Many communities now, hundreds of communities have passed ordinances like North Tulsa did that limit dollar store expansion, for example, because they want something better and they want the profits of businesses in the community not to go to a corporation but to stay local. So they limit that. Amazon and public purchasing. You wouldn't believe how many local governments buy from Amazon, even though doing so ultimately costs them about 17% more because of Amazon's dynamic pricing. It drives me crazy when I see local governments and school districts that ask people like to do surveys, and the prize for it is getting a $25 Amazon gift card. It's like as soon as you do that, you're hurting an existing business and the whole network of businesses that they support. Every retail business is going to hire an accountant and an attorney, and they use local bank, and all of those businesses suffer when that money leaves the community. Using pharmacy benefit managers instead of using local pharmacies. So those are all things that I think are important for communities to do to keep that money local and not have an outside interest come in and take things away. I'm really a big fan of community land trusts. I kind of alluded to that a little bit earlier, but it's a way to keep property affordable down the road. And if a community is ultimately successful in turning things around, nobody believes this when the community is depressed, that it's going to be at a point of really high economic performance. But when it does, national chains will come. National chains are not market leaders, they are market followers. They go where the opportunities are. And so if they see that a place has rebuilt its market and is attracting visitors and is attracting new residents, that's where they're going to want to be. And when they do that, rents shoot up across the board. So I love opportunities for communities, for community organizations to actually own property so that they can keep rents affordable and make it possible for kids graduating from high school to open a business there instead of um, flipping burgers for somebody or something like that. There's some great examples I'd point to. There's one in Philadelphia called the Kensington Corridor Trust, one in St. Paul called the Rondo Community Land Trust, that buy both housing and commercial space so that they can really keep things affordable. Um, the challenges can seem overwhelming at the beginning of the process, but I think it's important to look for easy wins early on so that you're building new organizational capacity and teaching people in the community how to work together. When you start breaking your big strategy into specific tasks, I think it's useful to sometimes include some that are as important for helping partners learn to work together as they are for the tasks themselves and for their outcomes. Um, it's important not to try to tackle the biggest problems right away, but to find some easy wins, step around the boulders and keep moving. I think about a couple of examples come to mind. There was a yarn store that I came across in Southern California in a rural area in the Central Valley years ago. And they were just, the community was losing population, the business owners were losing sales, they were really discouraged. They had this idea that if they actually could reach people in like a 50-mile radius, they could make their business work. So just like a food truck, they put together a yarn truck and it drives around, every week it's in a different town, every day it's in a different place. Made things happen. It was a small step, but it was a huge thing. Burlington, Iowa was had tried for years to get involved in downtown revitalization and make it work, and they kept failing, and they were discouraged, and they decided one more time to make it happen. And they actually had this huge launch party. 500 people came to it in a vacant storefront building downtown to say, we're going to try again, we're going to work together. And everybody came out of that launch party with a specific task that they could do, just, an hour or two of your time to begin to get things moving. And it just snowballed and built to great success. Um, Leveraging organizational skills. I think there's always a tendency for different organizations that kind of have a finger in this to think maybe they should be the ones who supervise it or coordinate it. In reality, every organization has a really important role to play. It's important to just sort of look at the organization and see what is its unique vantage point, what are its unique resources, and how can we plug those into an overall strategy. On a very sort of basic level, it's important to also make sure that you're paying attention to how you're plugging volunteers into things. I have found that there are kind of three kinds of volunteers I come across. There's affiliators. Those are the people who will do anything they just so they can do it with somebody else. They like being part of a group. They're the ones who come to meetings early and they bring the coffee and the donuts. But they're not so good working on their own. They like to do things in clusters. Then there's achievers. These are the people that you can like say, here's a task, and they take it and they run with it, but they're terrible at working with other people. They just want to do it on their own. And then there's the power people who can like, you can call them and they can get the street shut down for a street festival, but they'll never come to meetings. Organizations put them on their boards and they get frustrated because they don't attend the meetings. They don't need to, just think about what each person can bring to it and make sure that you have the right balance of sort of personality types for each task that you do. And finally, I mean, I'd say, the old adage is true that the best time to plant a tree is 10 years ago. And the time to prepare for an upheaval is before the upheaval is really upon you. If you have the opportunity to do that, put the tools and resources in place now so that you're in a better position to weather change when it comes. And it will come. It always comes to every community.
Thank you, Kennedy. There's so much to think about in there, and I really appreciate these lessons learned that you've taken from, different experiences that you've had. Um, Mike, I'm curious when you heard some of what Kennedy shared, if you think any of this relates to work in the Katahdin region. Does it spark anything for you based on our conversation today, or are there steps that you're starting to think about that you'd like to see Millinocket take or like to take in your own work?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything Kennedy said is worth going back and listening to again. It's funny, I literally yesterday having a conversation sort of in our community activation work about types of volunteers. I just wrote down your breakdown there, Kennedy. I was like, that's a good one for it. Um, there's a network here in the region called the Katahdin Collaborative that really came out of that gazetteer, and that network is really about what Kennedy was describing, like how can organizations figure out what their unique vantage point is and leverage that and working with each other, and that's definitely that is something I have seen grow and evolve in my years here so far. I think at first there were a lot of sort of elbows up, like who's got funding, who doesn't, sort of I'm going to do my thing. And more, I feel like organizations have figured out how to work together and really achieve more. And that's a never-ending process. Like that is a muscle that feels like it's constantly needing to get strengthened. The policy piece is one that's particularly interesting to me and something that I think Millinocket is ready for, that maybe all the communities in the Katahdin region need to be thinking about. To Kennedy's point, the time to prepare, it's like before the crisis. And we talk about it all the time in our work with outdoor recreation, because inevitably, there is a narrative across the country of towns sort of getting loved to death. Headwaters Economics out of, I think they're based in Montana. They have a great report about amenity trapped communities, places where, yes, trails went in and how home prices went up and it became untenable for folks to live there, kind of thing. So we think about that all the time. And, policy work is not work that we're directly involved with at OSI, but it's work that definitely needs to be happening. I know there are conversations happening around it, and it's tough because I think people are like, that'll be a good problem to have, like if we could only get to that point. And you're like, no, now is the time probably that we should be thinking about that, right? Because it's not quite the problem yet, and we have a opportunity to sort of, set the course before it becomes a problem. So I really appreciate that, and I do think that's where work needs to happen. And as a homeowner here, and as someone that's starting a family in this community, like I have a vested interest in seeing that this is a place that we can afford to live, in 10 years' time.
Thanks, Mike. So I'm going to move towards a closing question for the speakers so that we can open this up to Q&A. I saw there's already one question in the chat. Please keep them coming. We're going to turn to Q&A in a moment, and we'll also give you an opportunity to to speak a question if you'd like to do that. But I'd like to hear some wisdom from both Steve and Mike, based on the lessons that they've learned in Millinocket. So, from your experiences in Millinocket, and Steve, I'll start with you on this question. From your experiences in Millinocket, what advice would you give to struggling communities about how to use local wisdom and local resources to make changes? What lessons have you learned from Millinocket that you think others could benefit from?
Well, I guess maybe I don't know. Like I said, we're a group of mostly made up of people who grew up here, like much like myself, last of the good times, remember what it was, have a yearning for that community to return, um, but also have really strong capacity and capabilities too, which is some of the hardest things that rural communities, don't have, or impacted communities lose, right? I've always said at the downturn of the paper industry in our town, I said the last 20 years, our greatest export was not paper, it was people, because the people that we were growing and raising could no longer had opportunities locally, so they had to move as they aged. Um, so I think, in rural communities, you have a great or impacted communities like this, you've lost a lot of your human capacity. Um, and we know that, and so we knew that we had to create a big tent. We had to get a lot of people on board. It wasn't just going to be from the community. We weren't going to raise ourselves from ourselves. We had to go get federal support. We had to go state level support, and that is both, politically and financially. And so our mantra has been make a really big tent, and tied in to the work that you're doing that's impactful for a rural community. I think and I see it all the time here, whether people like Mike mentioned, really curious, where they spend a lot of time here, or they've purchased a second home here, or they spend time. I think about what attracts them. It's not the job. I mean, a little bit of the outdoors, that's certainly it. I think when it boils down to it, the biggest thing that attracts them is the sense of community and belonging. I think people from more populated areas don't have that sense, and they come here and it's like, wow, look at how people interact. I don't have that in my community, and I think that's a longing that a lot of people have, and I think that we can use that as a strength to attract people. I know I bring business associates who are in town out to dinner all the time, and I'm saying hi to every other person, and they're just amazed. They're like, "What is going on? You talk to every other person in here." And I'm like, that's the part of being in a small town that I think a lot of people yearn for. So we're hoping that we can turn that into part of our attraction because, workforce, we're going to have to attract workforce. It doesn't exist here anymore. But the area has supported it. Like I said, when I was in high school, 4,000 people more employed at one institution. So it can support it, but we're going to have to reattract it. And it's going to take everything. It's going to take that sense of community. It's going to take the natural resource assets, a lot of the work that Mike's been doing and improving access to those things. Um, it's going to take all that to attract the kind of workforce that we need. So I just knew that I guess being local gives you that sense of belonging and buy-in from the community. I think that's the biggest thing. But we knew that the means to getting us back to where we didn't exist here, and that we had to look much, much broader. Um, and we found out there was a lot of people from outside that care about um, rural communities, and they realize how important they are um, um, uh, to the state and to the country. So,
Thank
uh,
you, Steve. That was, I think so many people long for a sense of community and belonging. I think we're seeing that increasingly so in our society, and so I love thinking of that as a local asset. That's really beautifully said. Um, Mike, I'll turn to you for some lessons learned. Same question. What advice would you give to struggling communities about how to use local wisdom and resources to make changes. What lessons have you learned from Millinocket you think others could benefit from?
I just want to say before Mike jumps in
Oh,
there,
sure. I'm
that,
sorry, Steve.
Milwaukee has a sense of belonging community, but no, where Mike grew up, the county, it's amplified even more. I mean, when I go up there, I get just sense it's a whole nother level of community. I mean, first of all, they're isolated, right? All these communities, they're so far away from everything else. They do have to rely on each other. They're agrarian, so in their history, they've had boom and bust, and they've had to rely on each other. And when you make a 300-mile round trip to the Sam's Club, you bring stuff home for your neighbors and your friends and everyone else. So I mean, it's up there. Community is even more amplified. It's a really
Yeah,
special place.
I appreciate that, Steve. I was just home for Thanksgiving and sat at a high school basketball tournament and was reminded of the sacred ground that is the high school basketball scene. Yeah, one of the lessons that I'm constantly reminded of, or I never stop learning, is just how how much people care for their community. I've been able to sit on the board of the library now for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, and been able to interact with folks, that have spent their lives here, that have raised families here, that have watched things come and go, getting to work with people like Steve. Jane, I saw Jane's on the call, that, folks that have been sort of fighting the good fight here for a long time. And no one needed no one needed to come in and give them a beautiful vision for their community. It's there. They've always had it. It's incredible, the connection people feel to a place. I remember when I was contemplating, moving here, talking to a friend that lived here in town and sort of expressing my fear. And he was like, "Hey, even if we fail, we still get to live here, like this, you can't beat that." And so I guess I'm just constantly reminded of that, that it's a privilege to sort of be a part of that vision. Like I didn't have to come in and give that to anybody. It's here in spades. Um, I think advice, and this is advice I give folks all the time, we do work in communities across the state. And we always say, resilience is not an end point, it's a process. It's an ongoing process. So there's not some magical moment, I think, when your community is deemed resilient. It's a thing that, starting with your next interaction, you can be practicing and you can be building. And because that resilience was here, was deeply embedded in the people here, we've been able to be a part of that story and help it grow.
There are so many beautiful quotes from the things that you all have said today. I just wrote down resilience is not an endpoint, it's a process, and that's really, really lovely. Well, I'm sure the audience wants to ask some questions. I see there's already some energy in the chat, so I want to remind participants. You're welcome to place questions in the chat. You're also, in a moment after we get through these first two questions, you're welcome to unmute and ask a question yourself if you'd like. Just raise your hand and I'll call on you. So engage in the way that you feel comfortable. But we've got some really interesting speakers, and I know people are eager to ask questions. I see an interesting question from Todd. Todd, if you would like, I wanted to invite you to ask your question yourself. If you want to come on camera and unmute. If not, and I'll pause for a moment and I can ask the question. But it looks like you're coming on, so
Yeah,
I'll
I'm
turn it
here,
over
and
to you.
yeah, happy to ask it personally. I'm fortunate, maybe not one of the only people, but fortunate to have both graduated from VLS and spent a lot of time in the Millinocket region. So thank you all for being here and doing the work that you're doing. My parents owned a camp on South Twin Lake for about 15 years, and it was during the time period that we're talking about here. It was the mill had just closed down. They bought in 2006, so um, those first probably 10 years or so were part of the one thing, Steve, that you haven't mentioned, but that I saw was kind of a disbelief of what was happening, and a belief that the mill was going to reopen. and the locals really, really held on to that. Um, and it took a long time for the grief, I think, to set in. But I certainly experienced that, even in the few times a year that I got to go visit. Um, I saw the grief personally, but one of the things I also saw, and ultimately was one of the factors in my parents selling their camp, was the real estate market, particularly in once COVID hit and outsiders wanted to get away and get out into the woods. The real estate market really exploded, and the 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 amount that my parents sold their camp for was mind blowing. And I live in the DC area, so real estate prices to me, are very different than anybody in rural Maine. But even to me, I was absolutely shocked. And obviously, that was outsider money, and um, that's a whole nother conversation, I think. But I do want, in my mind, I thought outsiders bringing in this much money to the region is going to have positive impact. I mean, I'll just tell you that I looked just the other day because I was curious to see what else is on the market right now, where my parents were on Turkey Tail Road on South Twin Lake. And there is a I won't even call it a camp because it's a full blown house, but it's listed for $1 million. And no local is gonna be buying that. Um, but certainly someone coming in with $1 million, I would hope, is going to have a positive impact on the regional economy. And so I just wonder if we are 4 years or so into this, I think, real estate upturn, and have you all felt anything from that?
Steve, I'll
Well,
direct that to you first.
yeah,
Yeah.
it has certainly been one of the only drivers of the economy in the last 10 or 15 years is changeover in those camp lots and then reinvestment. First of all, for people who don't know, forever these camp lots, and we're talking probably about 11 or 1,200 of them on surrounding lakes, were leased by the paper company to basically their employees. And it was their second homes, but they were always leased. You could never purchase them, ever. And so people didn't put a ton of money into them because you didn't own the property. And banks were resistant to lend and that whole thing. But starting probably 15 years ago, they started selling these leases off. And then when that happened, now people owned it. Now you had something, and we've just seen an explosion of value. And I think COVID drove that because rural areas became a focus of people, and we've been discovered. Let's put it that way. Um, so that has been, certainly one of the few drivers is the reinvestment that people have been putting into those properties. It's almost impossible to get a qualified contractor here. So, but you're right. It's not a way to build. I mean, the future we're hoping is that we're going to bring working families. Can't think about those properties up there. And
Yeah.
so we're going to have another housing crisis on our hands, hopefully. Again, good problems to have. Um, and that we're not going to have adequate housing for families we need to attract for a workforce at those cost levels. So, and they aren't making any more of those as lots, Todd, as you know. So they're just reselling and upgrading, and every time they do they buy a $500,000 camp and they tear it down and they build a 1.51. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
kind of thing we're starting to see now because those lots are not it's not a growth market. Um, so while it's an upside, and but yes, who are we attracting, right? If you can afford $1 million place, I mean, we've been working on a downtown building that 5 years ago, we were hoping to be a co-working space that would have great internet connectivity because those camps 5 years ago did not have great internet connectivity. And we're like, if people want to spend more time here and do business, they need someplace to go where they can do business. And so we were trying to build that out as, okay, we have some capable people here. Could we keep them here longer? Could they bring some of their business here? Because of the beauty of the place. But Elon and Starlink overnight have now people can do that anywhere. So our downtown building idea, co-working space, is a little altered because of that. But yeah, think about the talent that is being attracted, and how do we capture that?
Thanks, Steve. Mike, I don't know if you want to add any quick thoughts. Don't feel pressured to, only if you'd like.
I mean, I can't speak, with any expertise as to where the housing market's going to go. I can just tell you anecdotally, we're in an interesting moment in time. There are three houses for sale on our street that they were all put up, I think, late summer. They've all, as far as I can tell, are all under contract, and they were, listed somewhere between 150 and 200,000, sub 200,000. So it's like the in-town market, certainly compared to just about anywhere else in the country, seems still like very reasonable. Those houses haven't been moved into yet, though. It's like it's not clear to me, like to Steve's point, is that a family that's moving in? Did someone buy that as a rental? There are other houses on the street that were purchased essentially as someone's, ATV or snowmobile kind of getaway. Like they go back to wherever they live and their toys are parked out front, kind of thing. In the last few years, we've hired our full-time staff team has grown, and we have a couple of young people, that one from the community, one that moved to the community, both 30 or younger, and they've been able to afford homes, which feels pretty unique given where the housing market is at in the U.S. So I'm very curious. I don't know where that's headed. And to Steve's point, like, yeah, we're very like we want to see these homes, um, scooped up by families that are here and being part of the community. The house that my wife and I purchased, the couple that was selling it, they wanted to ensure that it was going to someone that was going to live in it, and that worked to our advantage. So we'll see.
Thank you both. And Todd, thanks so much for the question and for being here. I see another question from Jamila. Jamila, would you like to come on and ask your question yourself? If not, I can read it for you.
She had to jump offline.
Okay, so I'll read this question. I'm interested in how a strong local economy can help people and families work toward the American dream, not just financial success, but the chance to live fully, be themselves. When people feel secure and valued, they may be more likely to get involved in their communities. In your view, do strong local economies make democracy stronger? If so, how have you seen that play out? So Kennedy, I think I'll direct that question to you, and then Steve or Mike, if you want to add any thoughts, you're welcome to, but no pressure.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jamila has just laid out the reason that it's good for people to have a choice of opening their own business versus working for a chain. And it's really important to create those opportunities because, I mean, we're so driven in this culture now by, improving shareholder value. Well, who are the shareholders really? It's people who live in communities, and we need to be increasing the value for them. Working for an independent business means that, kids are learning, not just how to do a particular task, but they're learning about merchandising and management and, the whole set of skills that they might need someday to open a business. And that's how you keep wealth in a community. You build a long-term generational wealth by building those locally owned businesses. The democracy question is an interesting one that I think about a lot because the more dollars are leaving a community and going off to a corporate headquarters somewhere, the less the community loses its decision-making power. Think about financial institutions when loans are made by some bank, headquarters someplace else instead of by a community bank or a credit union down the street who knows the community, then, underwriting criteria are, stricter and the money doesn't flow as much. It's really critical to, uh, in terms of local decision making, to have that local economic power concentrated in the community. I don't know if Steve, Mike, you have things to add to that, but that's my take.
I kind of interested in seeing to live fully and be themselves. I'm interested to see. I think it's going to work in how it plays on our school, right? If we attract a bunch of working families. They're going to put kids in schools. They're going to demand uh, good schools. Um, and that's part of creating the lives that they want. Our schools right now have fallen very far. Um, must be a lot because of the town budget. We can't attract the town that we had, but also just the family makeup that we have here. So my parents moved here in '63, fresh out of Gorham State Teachers College, which is now USM, to be teachers, and they had lifelong careers in the school system. Uh, but part of the attraction was coming here was the second highest per spending per student in the state behind Cape Elizabeth. Um, Now you fast track to today, the last 15 years, the only families that we've attracted are families looking for housing. And if you're looking for housing, you can think about, all the other needs that you have, and that's what the schools have been overwhelmed with. So, I mean, schools are now trying to they're dealing with the needs of the kids that are in there that are completely different than it was. And I mean, just an example, when my daughter was well, I'm like, well, you got to take the SATs, find out when that's going to be. And she wasn't getting anywhere. And so finally I called down and I said, well, what's going on with the SATs? Well, yeah, we might be having one this year. I'm like, what are you talking about? There's just no students or very few that had any intention on taking an SAT. Um, and that was completely opposite when I mean, three-quarters of us were taking the SATs when I was through. So it just tells you the type of makeup of families that are comprising our school systems. And so if you have that, you're going to provide for the service that your students need, and it's not SATs, right? It's everything else. Um, so I'm curious as to getting new working families here, going to demand new schools as part of what they want to provide for themselves and their families, and have that American dream play out there. It's going to be very interesting to see.
I'm looking at the question again, and I'm thinking about this. Do strong local economies make democracy stronger? It's a I would roll my eyes about economics growing up. As I said, I had a farming family who was like insistent, right? Extraction-based economy. This is what matters. And I was like, this sounds so boring. And I'm gonna go live the adventurous lifestyle outside. And now, on a day in and day out basis, it's local economics that sort of it's what I'm coming into contact with all the time. It's really what our work does ultimately come down to. Uh, and it fascinates me, and I don't pretend to understand it. But it seems to me like we are in a time of transition, in rural landscapes in particular. These communities are all here, or many of them are here because of the industry that cropped up, whether it was lumber or farming or uh, fishing, you name it. And a lot of that is not what's going to be the future anymore. And so um, I do think you need a strong local economy, obviously. Um, and I think the basis of what that economy is has a lot to do with whether or not democracy is being made stronger on that local level. I think Steve has pointed to the fact that, some of the way that, things revolved around the mill, you could argue sort of weakened um, some of that. And when I think about the future of places like Millinocket, I think rural spaces are going to need to be some of our most innovative spaces if they're going to survive. And when we talk about workforce development in our work, it's not, hey, outdoor recreation or outdoor recreation tourism is the future of rural economies. I think it can play a role, but we can leverage outdoor recreation and the lessons inherent in that space to foster a stronger workforce for whatever work looks like, to hopefully create those more nimble, adaptive, innovative young people that will determine what a local economy looks like in the future. So um, I don't know if that answers Jamila's question, but it's got me thinking for sure.
Well, thanks everyone for responding to that. We do have time for another question or two. If anyone would like to ask a question, you can either raise your hand or put a question in the chat. Would anyone like to ask a question? Michael, I
Yeah,
can see
hi.
your hand. Yeah.
Uh, Nice to have this meeting, hear from all the speakers. It's been productive, listening to everybody. So I just couldn't help but think, listening to everybody, that how much onus is on the state reps for helping to improve the economic productivity of those regions, of those local communities. I mean, contacting them, I mean, that's their job. That they're supposed to help those communities, whether it's in the state house, state senate, and then on the federal level as well. So I mean, that's what they're supposed to do. So I mean, how much accountability do they have that, it's on them? I mean, it's not, sometimes it's not always a private sector solution. I mean, sometimes, government does have a role. I mean, so I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Um, well, so on a state level, the state of Maine is not a place where you can raise a lot of capital, or a state that puts a lot of money towards attracting industry. Partly because we're only 1.3 million people. I mean, the pie is not super big. And then I also find that politicians like to take whatever money they have and spread a little bit everywhere, so people feel good about it, but it's not enough money to really move the needle. Um, we've been super successful on the federal level. Almost probably 95% of the 40 million plus that we've raised is coming from the federal level. And our senators work very closely both together. They put partisan aside when they're talking about working for Maine communities and bringing money here. And certainly Senator Collins, being the head of the Appropriations Committee of the Senate, has brought in an enormous amount of money to the state of Maine. Uh, so I think they're doing their term. But as far as the state level, it's never been really uh, of much interest to us because there's just the money just doesn't exist at the state level for whatever reason.
I would add to that that there's an important policy role I think that states have at the state level, and the federal government does to it to an extent, but states can really customize things. And I think about right now, Rhode Island, for example, is their legislature is considering 4 bills that are designed to sort of make the grocery industry more fair. One of them that I really like is one that that would make it illegal in the state for a grocery store chain, and Stop and Shop has been kind of notorious at this over the years, to basically rent a space and then leave it empty, but put a restrictive covenant on the deed so that no competitor can move in. And especially in small towns, that means you're not going to have a grocery store. And to an extent, there are other businesses that do that. There are some dollar stores, pharmacies, even movie theaters used to do that. But it's a really great policy solution to a really practical problem that a lot of communities have. So I think it's really good for states to explore things like this. I know that Maine has considered some legislation recently at the state level that's actually geared towards some specific problems that communities are having with Amazon distribution centers and big performance venues. So there's a lot of activity happening at the state level. There was a report that came out in the Guardian newspaper yesterday. They had done research on in 45 states to look at where dollar stores were overcharging people at the register because of scanner errors between the price on the shelf and the price that they're charged at the register. And Ohio is being very aggressive in pursuing this at the legislative level, by looking at state policy so that the fines that dollar stores are assessed for scanner errors are actually punitive and not just an annoyance they can slap away and keep doing their bad stuff. So there's a ton of great state legislation that can happen, and I'm seeing more state attorneys general get involved at that level, and I think we're going to see an upturn in that in the years ahead too.
Thank you both. And I see a couple other questions getting in. So I know we're getting close to time, but we'll see if we can cover a couple more of these. So Amber chatted a question and would like me to read it on their behalf. Um, uh, I'm curious what advice you all would give for small towns or communities that want to get out of their ruts and start a process of building themselves up and investing in their communities. Short version, what steps get processes like this started? So I'm not sure if anyone feels like they have an insight into this question. Kennedy, I'm not sure for you if you have the bird's eye view, if you might want to tackle this.
Oh, I think this seems like a Millinocket question. I'm looking at Steve.
Sure, sure.
Well, again, I mean, Arcatine started at the most humble kind of start. So I don't think you have to have it all figured out to get going. It was more about how can we get the community thinking more positively about itself, um, and focused on small wins. So I think, that's been certainly our case. And then 4 years later, we are owning a 1,400-acre industrial site and are now the default economic development entity of the region. But certainly did not start out with those intentions. So I think any steps moving forward is the place to start, and don't worry about how big or how small.
Yeah, I suppose I would just echo that. I'm thinking about some of the larger infrastructure projects we have going with different communities, especially here in the region, where you're talking about um, building trail infrastructure on 9,000 acres of community land. Like, how do projects like that start? And I mean, literally in each case I can think of, it was one person who then connected to a local organization who usually brought in one, two, sometimes a few more partners. But it's like the moment you've got more than just you at the table, things can start to happen. And we tend to find that if we have either a couple of organizations that are keen to work together, or one organization that sort of is representative of several, the wheels start to turn a little faster in that case. And both Kennedy and Steve have said this, but I'll just underscore it: like, small wins, consistent small wins lead to big wins.
Well, thanks to you both. So I wanted to acknowledge that Diana Moore and Thundercloud shared some heartfelt personal experiences in the chat. Really appreciate you sharing that, Diana. Um, I know that we're getting to the end of time here. So in a moment I'll wrap us up. Diana, I don't know if there was a question, a very quick question there that you wanted addressed, or it looks like you're just acknowledging. Okay. Well, thank you very much for sharing that with us. Um, I want to thank all three speakers, Steve, Kennedy, and Mike. This has been incredible. I feel like I've learned so much about what healing looks like after economic downturns, and I know that you've inspired our audience as well. I want to thank everyone for making time for this the first week in December, which I feel like is maybe one of the busiest times of the year. So I see it as a true gift, participants, that you made the time to stick with us. I do want to share that this is a longer term series that we have, these events about healing our community to heal our world. We started this last year, and you can catch any of these videos online. But our first was healing after an environmental disaster. Our second was healing after a health crisis. Just this fall, we had a session on how to heal after drug crises in communities, and taking a compassionate, community-centered approach to the drug crisis. And now we've had this event, which will also be available online if you want to share it with others. We will have more programming in the new year. We haven't had that established yet, but we'll be emailing you, and you can check out our website as well. And I just want to thank everyone. This has been a really wonderful talk today, and we'll see you again soon. So just appreciate everyone for attending. Thanks very much. Bye bye, everyone.